Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this new lecture in our program on the modern novel. My name is Faisal, and I will be your instructor. Today's lecture, number 9, we'll look at two subjects. We'll look at the antagonist of the story, and then we will look at the technique of foreshadowing. So let's begin. The antagonist, Jack Merridew. He's the antagonist of the story. So Jack Merridew is the main antagonist in Lord of the Flies. Throughout the novel, he stands in Ralph's way as Ralph attempts to create a civilized society on the island. We've seen in the previous lecture how Ralph is the protagonist, and Ralph tries to create a civilized society where people listen to each other, where people help each other, and where people try to have a plan to save themselves and return to civilized society. Jack is the antagonist. He's opposed to Ralph. So throughout the novel, Jack stands in Ralph's way as Ralph attempts to create a civilized society on the island. At the beginning of the novel, Jack is the leader of the choir boys and believes his status makes him the obvious choice for leader on the island as well. However, unlike Ralph, Jack is unable to lead the boys by being sympathetic and likable. So instead, he resorts to fear tactics, to bullying, to get what he wants. Although Jack initially accepts Ralph's leadership, he later works actively to thwart Ralph's attempt to keep the group together and maintain the signal fire. By starting his own tribe, stealing Piggy's glasses, and allowing the hunters to terrorize the little ones, Jack effectively destabilizes Ralph's leadership. By the end of the book, Jack has given in completely to his savage nature, overseeing the violent murder of Simon, the torture of Wilfred, and the killing of Piggy. So this is pretty much most of what we can say about the antagonist, about Jack. It's his opposition to Ralph that's most important in the novel. He is the opposite of everything that Ralph stands for. He's the prime challenger to Ralph, right? Now let's look at the technique of foreshadowing. It's a famous and prominent literary technique. And foreshadowing, basically, it's when the author gives you a hint beforehand of what's going to happen later. It's just a hint, right? And it can be used in pretty good ways, in very good ways, by good authors and good writers. So let's look at the foreshadowing technique, at its meaning and its significance. Foreshadowing is a literary device in which a writer gives an advance hint of what is to come later in the story. Foreshadowing often appears at the beginning of a story. So it's a hint at the beginning of the story of what is happening, of what will happen later, or at the beginning of a chapter. And what it does, it helps the reader develop expectations about the coming events in the story. This is basically what foreshadowing is used for. Well, how is it used in Lord of the Flies? Well, foreshadowing is an important technique in Lord of the Flies. And Golding, the author, employs several instances of indirect foreshadowing throughout the book. Nearly every plot event is foreshadowed in the establishing chapters. So when a major event happens, Golding foreshadows it at the beginning of that chapter. Almost every main event, right, is foreshadowed in the beginning of that chapter, creating a sense of inevitability to the events. Both character traits, such as Piggy's emotional fragility, and plot points, such as the climactic fire that leads to the boy's rescue, are foreshadowed heavily in the novel. So let's focus on these two examples, right? Piggy's emotional fragility and the climactic fire in the end that leads to the boy's rescue in the end and the end of the novel. Piggy's death. Piggy's death is an important plot point in Lord of the Flies and is foreshadowed from the first time we see his character. However, the exact nature of his death is an instance of false foreshadowing, as Golding's sets up the reader to believe Piggy will die from his physical frailty, not violence, right? Golding let us believe, gives us a hint that Piggy will die from his physical weakness, from his physical frailty, not from violence. But it's a false foreshadowing because Piggy will die a violent death. Piggy's death signifies the end of Ralph's fragile troop and a victory by the forces of violence and brutality over the forces of wisdom, kindness, and civility. The death is foreshadowed in the early pages when Piggy tells Ralph he has asthma and he can't swim and he needs his glasses to see and is sick from the fruit. He says, "Sucks to your asthma," Ralph replies, foreshadowing the boy's lack of concern about Piggy's physical vulnerability. When Jack breaks one of the lenses in Piggy's glasses, the foreshadowing of his fragility is repeated and his dependence on his glasses for survival. Later, he can't catch his breath and blue shadows creep around his mouth, suggesting he will suffocate while the boys look for the beast. That his death comes through an act of violence instead of his own physical condition defies the expectations set up by all the previous foreshadowing. So in a way, it's like Golding gives us false foreshadowing. He gives us a hint that Piggy will die from his physical frailty, his physical weakness. But in the end, he defies that by making him die a violent death. At the same time, the fact that the boys hunt pigs foreshadows the violent nature of Piggy's death, as when Jack says, "If only I could get a pig." So maybe here the connection between pig and Piggy, right, is also foreshadowing the fact that Piggy will be hunted just like the hunters hunt pigs. The second example of foreshadowing is the burning of the island. Fire serves as both a life-giving source and a deadly threat in Lord of the Flies. And Golding foreshadows its critical dual roles to the resolution of the novel throughout the book. Ralph immediately understands fire's importance as a source of heat, a way to cook meat, and most significantly, a means of signaling, passing ships, and getting the boys rescued, saying the fire's the most important thing on the island, because without fire, they will die of cold. Without fire, they can't eat, and without fire, they can't signal to the passing ships that they're there and that they need to be rescued. So the fire's the most important thing on the island. This sentence is repeated several times in the novel. But the first fire the boys set burns out of control. And one of the little ones goes missing, presumably killed by the flames, foreshadowing the fire Jack sets at the end to flash out Ralph so he can kill him. The importance of keeping the fire lit compared to the necessity of hunting pigs is the main source of tension between Jack and Ralph, and the final break comes between the two of them when Jack steals Piggy's glasses. Their means of lighting the fire. So when Jack steals Piggy's glasses, Ralph and his team cannot start a fire anymore. And we said fire is the most important thing on the island. Jack and Ralph's argument about the importance of fire foreshadow fire's ultimate role as sustainer of life, as fire, not hunting, rescues not only Ralph from his immediate danger, but all the boys from the island. So in the end, it's fire that saves the boys, not hunting. The boys' rescue. One of the sources of tension throughout the novel is the question of whether the boys will be rescued from the island. But several instances of foreshadowing suggest the boys will eventually be discovered. The anxiety about what will happen to them is established early in the book, when Piggy repeats, "Nobody knows where we are," and says, "The plane was shot down in flames. We may be here a long time." Shortly after, however, Ralph insists that there aren't any unknown islands left. Sooner or later, we shall be rescued. At this point, the question is whether there is any civilization left to rescue them. It's true, there are no more unknown islands. All the islands are known. But is there a civilization left? Because you have to remember the story is happening with the First World War in the background. Soon, though, a ship passes indicating that the world beyond the island still exists. The arrival of the paratrooper also links the island to the outside world. So these are 3 examples of foreshadowing used in the novel. And you can see that Golding uses them masterfully throughout the story, throughout the narrative. Sometimes he even gives us false hints. And also in the first part of the lecture, we talked about the antagonist, Jack, and his role in the story as a foil or as an opposition to Ralph. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the coming lecture. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.